everyone, welcome back to Psychology of Rock. If you're new here, my name's Nina, and today we are talking about one of my absolute favorite studies ever conducted on heavy metal culture because it specifically focuses on Gen X metalheads and completely flips a widely accepted, ridiculous narrative using real long-term evidence. For those of us who grew up in the scene, I think the results offer a scientific validation for a lived experience that many of us felt actually saved our lives. As I'm sure you can remember, however, back in the Satanic Panic of the 1980s, heavy metal wasn't just frowned upon, it was fully treated as a cultural threat that was thought to be linked to devil worshipping and violence. The teenagers who listened to it were often seen as the ones most at risk for being negatively influenced by it. There was a real fear that this group in particular would grow into a generation of unhappy, dangerous, and dysfunctional adults. And what I love about this study is that it did not just push back on that idea in theory. It followed these same metalheads across decades to see what actually happened to them. And I think you're going to find it extremely interesting, especially if you grew up with this music and constantly had to hear from everyone how it was going to ruin your life. So the study we're talking about is called 3 Decades Later, The Life Experiences and Midlife Functioning of 1980s Heavy Metal Groupies, Musicians, and Fans from 2015. I will of course link it in the description box so you can read it for yourself, but the point of the study was to examine the long-term psychological health of the heavy metal community. It followed 377 people and divided them into 3 groups: fans of heavy metal from the 1980s, fans of other music from the same era, and a group of current college students so that they could compare across generations. They looked at what these people experienced growing up, how happy they were, and how their lives turned out overall. So let's go ahead and talk about the results, and I'm going to give the spoilers right away because I actually think the psychology behind these findings is even more fascinating than the conclusions themselves. So in a nutshell, what the data revealed about metalheads was a remarkable level of resilience. It showed that despite the high-intensity lifestyle that's often associated with the scene, the metalhead group emerged in middle age as significantly better adjusted and more satisfied with their lives than their mainstream counterparts. But I think to give the full picture here, we actually have to back up a little bit because this outcome is even more impressive when we look at the bigger picture, which starts with the fact that the metalheads did report having much more difficult early lives. They were much more likely to describe challenging childhoods and higher levels of risk-taking behavior when they were young than either of the control groups. So if we stopped reading there, the findings do seem to match up with what everyone was so worried about at the time. But if we look at the long-term data points, we can see that the music, in most cases, turned out to be a huge protective factor as time went on. And on top of that, the study also suggests that they were usually drawn to the chaos of the genre in the first place because it sounded like their lives and it echoed their emotions and experiences, as opposed to the music influencing them to feel that way, which is a huge distinction. This is especially true given the fact that the further findings showed that these very same individuals as adults, at minimum, were doing just as well as everyone else, and in many cases were actually found to be doing dramatically better. They reported higher levels of happiness, stronger adjustment in their personal and professional lives, and a greater sense of satisfaction overall compared to both their peers from the 1980s and the current college group. So despite starting out with more challenges, they ended up with better mental health outcomes than all of their peers. But like I said, the explanation of these findings is even more validating. The study showed that a big part of that outcome came down to the role of the metal community itself. For a lot of people, the scene provided a true sense of belonging, which is something they were simply not finding anywhere else. Most of the metalheads in the study said that they felt like outcasts and that they just did not align at all with mainstream culture or ideology. Being part of a group that openly embraced feeling different created extremely strong social connections and a real sense of self-acceptance. Going to concerts and having these shared experiences and a clear cultural identity gave people a support system that stayed with them for years and years. In fact, many are still involved with the scene to this day. And as you probably expected, there's also a psychological element to it. Heavy metal is known for exploring intense themes like anger, alienation, and struggle. Instead of amplifying those feelings in a harmful way, the music gave fans a healthy way to process and release them. It created space to confront emotions directly rather than avoid them, which made listening to the music an emotional outlet. The study also showed that the sense of shared identity also played a huge role in these positive outcomes. The visual and cultural markers of metal, from the music itself to the way fans present themselves, made it easy for metalheads to recognize one another right away and connect instantly. And as we know from research, that kind of connection, especially during adolescence, can have a huge impact on well-being. But one of the most striking findings from the study has to do with how these fans look back at their younger years. They reported extremely high levels of nostalgia and a strong sense that they had fully experienced that period of their lives. That feeling was so strong that it carried forward, which actually shaped how they viewed their lives as adults. Taken together, I think the study paints a very different picture than most people would have expected. It turns out that the same group that was negatively stereotyped and even feared and criticized by the mainstream, for the most part, grew into adults who are extremely resilient, connected, authentic, and much more happy with their lives and choices than most people. And what I find so personally satisfying about these findings is that in the 1980s, high-profile groups like the PMRC and even some clinical psychologists argued that heavy metal was a pathology. They basically said it was a sign of a broken kid that would become a broken adult. This study took that exact troubled kid profile and proved to these critics that they were looking at the wrong data completely, and that these so-called danger signs were actually coping mechanisms, which was absolutely the case for me. So, in my opinion, this study effectively rewrites the history of a misunderstood subculture. A little bit late, but it definitely feels good to finally prove them wrong. As always, I cannot wait to hear your thoughts on this research, so please leave your comments down below. I'd also love to hear which bands and which songs got you through your adolescence, and if you're still a fan today. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the analysis. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.